Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in. That's what I want to know. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson. Hello and welcome to episode 130 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Joel Hauer is the founder and CEO of Liquor Loot, one home for two subscription services delivering 3 premium whiskey and gin tasters from around the world each month. These brands, Whiskey Loot and Gin Loot, are designed to take subscribers of all knowledge levels on a deeper journey to understand whiskey and gin. After an early career in advertising, Joel started his own agency to help businesses navigate the digital ad world, and later combined this experience with his passion for spirits to build Liquor Loot. As the sole founder and CEO of the business, Joel's role involves sourcing the monthly product and implementing changes in its delivery systems, managing supplier and investor relations, and ensuring continued growth of the near 5-year-old business. Today's episode is sponsored by Access Collins, your one-stop shop for inquiries, reservations, and events. For full visibility and control over your bookings and inquiries in one central place, check them out at theaccessgroup.com.au. Let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome to the show, Joel.
Hi, how are you going, James?
Very well, thank you. Very well. Thank you for joining me on the program. Very excited to have you on. Looking forward to having a chat about the business that you run. And I know that it's evolved from a background in the agency world. So really interested in where you've come from to do what you do now. But as you know, the first question I like to ask is a crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience. So what have you brought to the show today?
As you probably know, my background is not directly in hospitality. You just mentioned their advertising agency, but being in Whiskey Loot and growing that business, I do have some crazy kind of operational story. And that was essentially, we decided, I think, to launch our 2019 advent calendars that have 24 whiskeys in them about 2.5 months before we were supposed to sell all of them. So it was a super late decision. And what actually happened was we did the design and the web page essentially simultaneously, got a 3D guy to put together all the renders on that design. And essentially we probably had about a month to get it all produced in China and back to Australia. The timelines were so tight that I jumped on the flight to China to make sure that our supplier essentially was going to deliver it. We ended up having it to be air freighted. I got lost in transit, so I was a couple of days late, and then got back to Sydney and was on the next flight to Tasmania to meet with an investor. And so it was just it was a crazy week. We ended up selling about 500 of these advent calendars for our inaugural launch, and everything turned out well, but behind the scenes, it was absolute chaos.
Wow. So tell me about when you're designing this advent calendar, what do you actually need to go to China to do?
We work with our packaging suppliers, so they create all of our boxes there, and we custom design all of the boxes. Essentially, they're a box with about 24 slide-in, slide-out trays, and this was custom made, so we needed to go over there with our suppliers and essentially just make sure that the prototypes looked good because the timelines were so tight, we didn't have time for them to even FedEx over the prototypes and for us to provide feedback and then go from there. So it was a very tight turnaround, but it all came well in the end.
Oh, good, because that was going to be my next question is, did it pull through? Were you okay in the end?
One small issue which we overcame. When you come to packaging design, every millimetre counts, and essentially one part of the box was about 1 millimetre or 2 millimeters too small for our tasting notes to slide in. So we essentially just ended up sticking the tasting notes on the other side and popping in a thank you letter in this opening that we had originally made for the tasting notes. It's one of those things that you're expecting something to go wrong. And so if it's only 2 millimeters, then it's easy to solve.
Yes. Joel, thank you for sharing that story. So crazy in that you had a super tight deadline that you had to get done and then roll with the punches and deal with a couple of curveballs along the way there. Tell us about where you were before you got into the business you're doing now.
I was in advertising and marketing in Australia, so I've traveled quite a bit. but mainly lived around eastern suburbs of Sydney. And so maybe picked up an accent here and there. In advertising is where I started all the way back as pretty much an intern, worked in creative agencies and made my footings in digital production, digital creative, and then went out on my own to start a small digital agency where I was very lucky to be able to learn. Digital marketing is something that you're always learning, no matter if you call yourself an expert or not. And I was able to learn alongside some great e-commerce businesses, and that was something that gave me a great starting point for launching Whiskey Loot.
Joel, as you know from here, I normally ask, why do you do what you do? What is it that really motivates, inspires you to get up and do what you do every day?
I think I love solving problems, whether it's specifically within what I've chosen to do right now in whiskey or what I was doing previously in kind of advertising and marketing. And prior to that, I also had a co-working space which I launched. And it's just creative solutions to everyday problems and using digital marketing and digital kind of channels to provide a great user experience. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to digital stuff. So I love getting into the nitty-gritty and understanding how things work. And when I was able to combine my passion of whiskey and digital marketing and create an e-commerce brand that I think resonates with a lot of customers, it was the best of all worlds.
Yes. So from the way you describe it, you're putting things together. I was going to ask what really caused you to get out of that world. Do you see them as very much the same thing? What made you move away from advertising and the advertising agency?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I look at advertising, and this is purely an economic thing, I was selling my hours, and it's very difficult to scale beyond a certain point. So I got up to about 6 or 7 staff with that business, and I was doing crazy hours and working on the side on other business ideas with a few people. And it's a fantastic business and it can give you a lifestyle, but you are always selling your time. And I really was passionate about starting something that could scale a little bit further than just myself. If I wanted to take a holiday, I didn't have to worry about managing my staff or billing the specific hours that I need to bill to get the job done. So I really wanted something that the scale could grow outside of just my time. And it comes down to, wouldn't you like to go to sleep at night selling something and wake up in the morning? All you have to do is deliver it. So it was really a bit of an economic choice that I wanted to pursue an opportunity outside of digital, outside of the agency business model.
And has it gone along the way there to achieve that objective?
It's gone great. I mean, I had to say goodbye to a few really great clients when I made that decision to close the agency. And I called up a few freelancers that I knew and said, hey, do you want this client that I can pass on and hopefully manage that process of handing it over to you? But this is something that you need to start small and in those early days. And when I slashed my salary in half and had to pour a lot of money and effort into the business and continue to do that probably for the first 18 months, and then it hits a certain amount of runway where you can justify paying yourself more and employing more people and growing the business. So it certainly has achieved the goals. Definitely more revenue than I had at the agency and more potential to scale outside of just that small local business.
And being in a totally different world, a totally different industry, have you been able to transfer some of the resources that you had previously over into your new business as well?
I tried to initially, and that was something that I met with a little bit of hesitation. The team that I had with me at the agency were essentially, we had a designer, a developer, a strategist. They really like the agency model. They like working for different clients. And it does create a day-to-day environment that's challenging, but it is also varied and nothing's ever the same. So asking them to move to a one-client project didn't really suit why they signed up for that business and why they wanted to do what they do. So they ended up migrating it to other businesses, and I got new staff. And obviously when you're getting new staff, you can pitch the idea, pitch the dream, and find people that really buy into the lifestyle and the work-life balance that you're trying to create for them.
Excellent. And since then, tell us about now what your business looks like. What do you do and how is that actually executed?
Yeah, right now we've got about 15 staff in the business. Plus we've got warehouse and casuals that come and go depending on the volume of work. It really is a whiskey discovery platform. We've just launched gin as well, and that's a separate business within ginloot.com. And the idea essentially is to bring people into the world of whiskey or gin that may be a little bit afraid of potentially buying something they might not like or not having the information in front of them to actually learn about what they're trying and figure out the difference between bourbon whiskey or the difference between Speyside and Highlands or what it is that they really like. and how they can put their finger on the type of cask or the type of flavor profile that they like. It comes with a little bit of experience to actually not just say, I like Macallan, but I like sherry casks over 12 years old. So we're actually trying to change the way people pinpoint what they're passionate about.
So there are a lot of players in your space. How have you dealt with competitors? A lot of guests describe it in a way that they don't look at competitors as competitors, but how do you look at that world and being in a very competitive industry? What have you taken away from some of those other businesses that are in the same space?
When we started, there was a couple of small competitors doing whiskey subscription boxes. They fell by the wayside, and a few of them we were actually in conversations with about acquiring them. The opportunity presented itself after we got a little bit more notoriety for other competitors to come to the market. So we've got a couple more in and around our space, but we're the biggest when it comes to the actual tasting bottles, which I think is very different to a Dan Murphy's or a BWS or a Nick's or something like that, where you're going there to buy that full bottle, or potentially another subscription model where you're buying a full bottle every month. What we're doing is really creating an entry point for people to jump into the world of whiskey and really go from novice all the way through to expert. And it is our guided journey where we're providing tasting videos and content so that you can learn and really articulate what it is that you like at the end of that.
So Joel, since then, you mentioned that those competitors had dropped off. They're gone now and other competitors have come in. There are a few people doing a similar sort of thing. What does the industry look like? Has it been consolidating? You said you were looking at acquiring those businesses. So what's actually happened in that particular subset of the industry?
I don't think there's a huge amount to talk about there. I mean, when we talked with the business owner that was essentially wrapping up at the stage one of their subscription competitors, I was in Melbourne at the stage and organised a lunch with him, and he never turned up. So these businesses, and no disrespect to them, but I have a feeling they were a little bit more in hobby stage. They got a brown paper box and they got a couple of bottles off the shelf and essentially started filling them at home and sticking a handwritten label on them. It was less of an experience for the customer as a solution maybe for their close friends that just happened to, go wider than that. So they created a website and allowed people to sign up, but it was never something, in my opinion, that was intended to be scaled. Most of them, I heard, still had full-time jobs, so they weren't really focused on making it a bigger thing at that stage. Maybe they had aspirations, but before they decided to wrap up the business, they didn't reach that scale.
I like that answer. So Joel, coming from a background outside the industry, how have you learned about these products? Is it a matter of just tasting a bunch of different whiskies and gins yourself, or have you learned from a particular resource or read books or listened to podcasts? What have you done to really get your head around these things?
Yeah, great question. I came obviously from a strong base in terms of I was very interested and I was passionate about learning, but that's still very difficult to pick up an expensive bottle of whiskey every day and try and consume that volume. And obviously you want variety, and our business model was about providing people variety. My wife right now tells me that she can't buy me any gifts because I always create the business that's the perfect gift for me, which I think that's great. So essentially, I picked up a lot of books. I talked to a lot of people. I went to a lot of bars and tried to strike up conversations with bartenders and really learn about the world of whiskey. One of the first people that I hired for the business, and this was way back when I was still operating my agency, there was about an 8 to 12 month period where I had the agency, I had Whiskey Loot, and I actually had two other things that I was working on at the same time. And it ended up being a little bit of a crazy moment in my life where I was just doing stupid hours, really. But I hired a guy that knew a lot more about whiskey than me to really try and drive the business as more of a general manager at the time. He was the only employee, and I wasn't paying myself, I was just paying him. And I learned a lot through him. And then I obviously continued to work after he left with distilleries directly and establishing those relationships. And when you've got a distillery or a distributor coming in and representing brands and showcasing what they've got, you learn very quickly because you are able to sample a lot that is out there. So it was a combination of a lot of different resources.
I want to focus a little bit more about the education, not necessarily on product and the actual liquid that you're giving to customers, but around the packaging, the shipping. There's a lot more to that side. And you mentioned at the start of the episode about going over to China to have a chat with your suppliers over there. How did you navigate that world, coming also from a different space to that?
I would have to say that was actually more difficult than navigating the world of whiskey or even the world of investors, because that was really new to me as well. navigating and figuring out operations, logistics, supply chain, packaging, that really provided me with a lot of gratitude for people that are experts in that field. And I'm very lucky to work with a few experts right now in that space. And I made a lot of mistakes early on. I made mistakes when it came to, the actual dispatching of the product. We changed packaging a few different times. We had bottles that leaked because we ordered the wrong lids. Our first batch of boxes, we wanted to go down this personalization route by writing people's names on the boxes themselves. And that was an operational nightmare by matching up the delivery slip and the packing label to the box with the name. In a production line, that doesn't quite work. I had issues with getting our first liquor license that was specific to the office that we were in. And probably about 6 months later, we had to get another liquor license because we had to move offices. So there were constraints within that as well. And just generally speaking, on making sure that we don't run out of stock. The subscription business model, it can be great on one hand. You have repeatable recurring revenue, but on the other hand, it's something that you can't take a month off or you can't have a break. You've always got to deliver that product. If you're going through a website migration, you can't just switch off the website for a month and bring people back the next month to a new website. Everything needs to happen while you're live and while you're shipping. So that was a lot of the learnings from an operational perspective, where we've probably paid way too much in terms of bringing in containers, or we've probably got ripped off with our suppliers, lost money on goods that didn't quite fit the bill for what we needed. So there are a lot of learnings, but I'm pretty confident now that we've gone through a big chunk of the expensive learnings.
Given that you're consolidating these samples from other distilleries, are you drop shipping, or how are you actually going through that process? What have you landed on there?
So essentially, we have a warehouse in Sydney, and what we do is we collect the whiskey from our suppliers. So that could be essentially 100 litres of whiskey, or it could be bulk format, or it could be, if it's already bottled, just receiving those bottles. So we receive that into our warehouse, and we've got food grade equipment that goes through and bottles that. That's another one of our learnings. Actually, the original piece of equipment that we had made was probably a $50 or $60 machine that bottled for us, and it was a prototype made by a family friend. Ended up working for the first 6 months of the business, which was amazing. And then we got into some more professional kit, but very good to get hands-on early on, so you know how things work. And now we have a group of casuals that come in, and we know what orders need to get packaged and processed, and we do the filling and the bottling and getting it into the packaging and out the door for our customers.
Fantastic. And looking back over to the products now, what have you been seeing that's been something innovative happening in the world of whiskey? I know gin's gone through a more recent gin craze, kind of gin craze Mark II. I had an excellent guest on, he was a whiskey economist, talking about the economics of whiskey and around age statements. But I'm interested to know what you've seen in that space, if there's been anything interesting or quirky that you've seen going on that maybe even customers haven't seen yet or will see looking forward, something that you've got the pulse of.
There's been a few over the last couple of years. I've definitely seen the rise of no age statements. I think that gives distilleries a lot more flexibility when it comes to blending something that doesn't need to be marketed as a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old. It is what it is, and you put a great name to it and a great story to it, and it still be amazing liquid. It's not to say that it's under the threshold of 2 or 3 years, depending if you're Australia or Scotland, but it provides a good alternative to some age stock that they can barrel and put in a bottle exclusively at one age statement. I think there's a bit of a movement in more of your, scientific approach to distilling, and people trying to do really interesting things when it comes to speeding up the maturation process. So whether it's kind of with sonic vibrations or different types of placement of the oak within the barrel, there's certainly some experimentation going on there, which is really interesting to listen about and taste. Not so much in Australia right now, but it's happening around the world in small amounts, and I'm sure it will increase as people get to taste, some different ways that whiskies are matured a little bit faster than an age statement, but that the taste can be similar. Then it's probably looking at some new makes as well, and some distilleries that are producing whiskey and actually bottling it that is underneath the legal requirement for aged whiskey. In Australia, that's 2 years. But what we're seeing is that this type of whiskey, even though it doesn't have the label whiskey, it might be called new make, actually showcases, in my opinion, some great distillery expertise, creating a very flavorful new make that doesn't come with that aging process.
I'm wondering how traditionalists have received that, given that these innovations are happening. I'm guessing that your customer base is mostly people who are open to those trying new things, given that they're wanting to try all these different whiskies and learn. They're probably not those traditionalists. What sort of adjustment is taking place? Are we seeing that there's more interest in those newer kind of funky whiskies, or are we seeing that there are mostly the traditionalists fighting back and that things are regressing, maybe for lack of a better term? That doesn't necessarily represent my views. I obviously like innovation. Are things going to more traditional methods with a pushback, or are new things being pioneered?
That's a great question. I think it really is an individual thing at the end of the day. But what we're finding for our customers, this also comes down to not only the feedback we get online, but the feedback that we get when we do some events as well, is when we put something new in front of a customer that they haven't tried before, you're usually met with a little bit of hesitation. And two examples that come to mind are Indian whiskey and millet whiskey. So millet is an African grain. So instead of malted barley or something like that. And both of those examples, people have turned around and said, oh my God, this is the most amazing drink I've ever had, whether it contrasts their expectations of that single malt approach that they're really traditionally aligned to. It doesn't really matter. It's about the taste at the end of the day. And both of those examples, millet and Indian whiskey, have met those reactions from customers. So I think people are potentially apprehensive of that experimentation. But when it comes to different locations or different grains, I think that is something that they just need to taste and experience. And it might be that depending on who they are and what they believe in, and obviously if they like it or not, because that's the most important thing, they might come around to those different approaches or call it kind of new world whiskies.
Joel, I'd like to ask you about who you listen to. Who do you get advice from? Who is really guiding you in your decisions there? I know that you mentioned just a little bit earlier that a new world to you was the finance world and raising capital there as well. Are they the people that are guiding you and advising you along the way, or do you have different people that you take advice from?
I'm really passionate about business in general, and I have really enjoyed the journey that we've taken with investors. And I have a number of advisors that advise me in the business on a weekly perspective. And I would say that I take a lot of feedback from them, and I look up to them from what they've achieved. An example there is Koala Mattresses. The founder of Koala is one of our advisors and investors, and the experience that he's had growing his business at an incredibly fast pace is something that is invaluable for where we are at the stage of our business at the moment.
Excellent. Are there any other people that have supported you? What's the sort of network that you have for that support?
A lot of it is internal, like advisors and staff. I'm not someone to create a direction for the business and write it on the wall and no one can debate it. It is a very conversational evolution, and I'm lucky to have some great staff around me that are integral to the business. So it's in combination with staff, advisors, friends that I've got, and obviously I'm just like anyone else, and I'm reading a lot out there from news articles mainly and looking at different businesses and different approaches. I wouldn't say that it's anything specific. It evolves for me a lot. It changes all the time. I'm a very big browser of content, and I like to absorb lots of different areas that I'm really passionate about, learning different things from different areas that could teach me about business or psychology or supply chain or production. So yeah, I'm quite varied when it comes to learning new skills and new things from different people.
And you mentioned you are looking to some other businesses out there as well. Maybe they're in other industries or adjacent to you. Who are you looking to, and what are you taking from them that then you're applying within your business?
With our business, we're looking at other subscription businesses mainly, and we also look overseas quite a lot. Often it comes down to food delivery or even wine businesses that are doing a great job overseas, and some in Australia as well. So it comes down to looking really deeply into the way they operate the business, the type of conversational storytelling methods that they use when it comes to marketing and user experience design. So it is learning, I think, from some great examples out there. And a lot of that time, for me, I'm often looking at user experience. I'm often looking at different marketing messages or different channels that they're using. And even if it comes to sponsoring podcasts and stuff like that, there's a lot of different channels that are not used as much in Australia as they are overseas. And that's something I'm really interested in learning more about.
Yeah, absolutely. Who are those people or businesses, and what is it that those businesses are doing well that you're going, okay, that's a thing that's really interesting. We should look at that. Or what's something that you've taken away that then has worked really well for you?
Yeah, one of those ones for me is actually HelloFresh. So I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with that. I very early on noticed that they do things like handing out little pamphlets at train stations. And I think that's one of the first touch points that I had with the brand. I signed up from there, and I'm actually not a subscriber at the moment. It doesn't suit my lifestyle. I prefer cooking from scratch. But I think that their communication is something that is very much comparable to what we do at Whiskey Loot. And from a subscription point of view, I really like taking the ideas that they have when it comes to churn. I received in the mail at home an invitation, and the T's and C's that it's only available for customers that have previously cancelled. So I can see from there that it's a specific personalised message to customers like me who have signed up in the past and cancelled, and the way that they did their discounting was interesting. It wasn't get $20 off when you sign up. It was get 20% off your first 3 boxes and then 10% off your next 3 boxes. So gradually eased you into full price offering. And it's those type of kind of strategic decisions that I'm interested in. HelloFresh is a great example of a business that has the same challenges as us when it comes to acquiring new customers or retaining or even managing that churn and reactivating old ones.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer there as well, Joel. I'd love to know what your biggest challenge is right now. What is it that you're dealing with, or something that you're looking at that you're handling or dealing with that it is maybe a bit of a challenge?
Yeah, definitely. We're looking to expand the business outside of Australia. So we're looking on getting into Asia at the moment. And that's a bit of a challenge logistically. And obviously the climate with COVID at the moment does create a bit of a logistical nightmare where you need to obviously do things remotely. So we're challenged by trying to figure out the best go-to-market strategy, who the partners are, what the best kind of operational model would be there. Things that I haven't done before, like how do you structure a cross-border business with different currencies, all operated from the one website. There's a few logistics and kind of strategic decisions to be made with that one.
Yeah, excellent. That's very exciting as well. And certainly an interesting time, as you said there, during this, I want to say post, but it's certainly not post-COVID. We are still in the depths of this absolutely elsewhere in the world. Australia seems to be pretty good, but I want to try to avoid most of that conversation. We've got a dedicated program for that. Joel, I'd like to know who you'd like to hear on the show next.
I think Sven Almaning from Speakeasy Group. I came across Eau de Veil. It was probably still is one of my favourite whiskey bars in Sydney, and he's just launched Molnar, and it was one of the first guys I reached out to through a connection and asked his opinion on Whiskey Loot before we launched. And he told me about the Keepers of the Quake, which is this super private whiskey club that's invite only, and it just sounded like it's from another world. I think that would definitely be worth a story on this show.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for putting Sven's name forward. He's certainly an industry name that a lot of listeners will be familiar with. Joel, thank you so much for joining me on the program. It's been a pleasure having you on. Been very interesting hearing about your background too, and a Whiskey Loot, Gin Loot. I'm very excited for the future that you are creating there, and looking forward to staying in touch as things grow. So thank you very much for joining me on the program.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on, James.
This program is hosted by James Henderson, with technical production by Jake Olver. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan and Shim Phelan. Thanks to our distribution team, and a special thanks to you for tuning in every week. This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.